It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday morning at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. For the first time on my little monster show here, I'm going to talk about one of the more recognizable and important names in modern horror, the late, great George A. Romero. So, look, most people know about how he's the father of the modern zombie movie. After all, his first film, Night of the Living Dead, is not only one of the biggest things to happen to horror ever, but its status of being in the public domain means that it's really easily available and to watch on YouTube, or local horror hosts can do shows on it very cheaply on televisions and websites and so forth. He followed that up with a few sequels with Dawn of the Dead, which we have covered on Film Seizure some time ago, and Day of the Dead, and then a trio of the Dead movies that came out in the 2000s, which were like Land of the Dead, Diary of the Dead, and Survival of the Dead, I think is the fifth one. I don't remember though, or the sixth one rather. But anyway, those came out in the early 2000s. Now, but here's the thing with Romero. He made a lot of really interesting movies over the decades outside of the zombie genre. After Night of the Living Dead, he then made three lesser-known movies that I think are just as well made as that popular zombie flick. In 1973 alone, he did two movies, Season of the Witch and The Crazies. Now, Season of the Witch is a fairly decent little exploration of housewife boredom in the suburbs. That housewife turns to witchcraft, and she kind of uses that to take back control of her life as she tries to get out from under a sort of jerkish husband. It was one of the very few times in which Romero delved into the supernatural. There is a very, very slight touch of supernatural in this movie. I'll get to that a little bit later on. But then, with The Crazies, he kind of returned to what made Night of the Living Dead so fascinating, in that a virus makes people violent. It doesn't kill them, doesn't turn them into zombies, but it's like an anger plague or a rage virus that we would later see in movies like 28 Days Later. The Crazies kind of has that same rough feel to it like Night of the Living Dead, while also having the societal angle about how to deal with essentially a crumbling civilization that's making people not act civilized anymore. Then in 1977, Romero made Martin. Now, on the surface, Martin is kind of a vampire movie, but not. It's a little creepier than that because it does have it doesn't have the supernatural element to it. It's a psychological horror film. This is about our titular Martin sedating women with a narcotic and then drinking their blood from them. He thinks of himself as being like a classic Eastern European vampire. His elderly cousin from Lithuania begins to believe him to actually be a Nosferatu. It's a really well-made movie that is very eerie and among Romero's best-received films. The following year after Martin, Romero made what is arguably his best film, Dawn of the Dead. Honestly, you can have a pretty good discussion over what his best films were between Dawn and Night of the Living Dead and Martin. But Dawn catapulted Romero into a pretty successful career in the 80s. He became very interested in kind of going back to the roots of his youth and doing anthology horror like that was seen in horror comics. And that was certainly the inspiration for Creepshow and Creepshow 2 in 1982 and 1987, though the latter he only wrote. But he also developed the TV series Tales from the Dark Side, and in 1990 he turned Tales from the Dark Side into a film as well, and he also teamed up with his Italian buddy Dario Argento for another anthology called Two Evil Eyes. He'd even adapt a Stephen King book into a movie with 1993's The Dark Half. Now, Romero and King had a pretty good relationship. They were both involved with Creepshow and Creepshow 2. They were apparently pretty good friends. Now, part of that working relationship they had with those two Creepshow films and The Dark Half leads to confusion that I always had about Monkey Shine's which is what we're talking about this week. Now, for some reason, for most of my life, I thought Monkey Shines was a Stephen King book that was turned into a movie, or maybe a script that King wrote. That's, of course, not true whatsoever. It was, however, based on a novel by British writer Michael Stewart. Now, Stewart got his start with political thrillers before turning to what would become what he's best known for, which are psychological thrillers. More specifically, he liked writing about scientific and medical breakthroughs kind of going bad. Monkey Shines would be his best known book. And we'll be getting into that movie here soon enough. But Monkey Shines came out in July of 1988 and was not a success. In fact, it didn't make back its $7 million budget. And it's kind of interesting because it was not totally unliked by critics. Many critics liked it a whole lot, while others did feel that maybe this movie is a bit too long. It does come in just a few minutes shy of 2 full hours. That's something that back in the 80s you wouldn't have seen in a horror movie that much. But for a little while, I think people kind of laughed off the movie because the monster was this cute little capuchin monkey that you just want to cuddle and give chin scritches and love on and all that stuff. However, I think the movie got the benefit of reappraisal over the more recent years. Initially, Romero wasn't the one who came into this project wanting to do it. He had to be convinced by the executive producer, Gerald Paunessa, and he wanted Romero for his darker sense of humor. And in the end, this was the second time Romero would work with the studio. The first time, his first studio film was Creepshow. This was his second. And it would be the second most expensive movie at the time that he worked on it. It was also the most film he had ever shot for a movie. The post-production on this film was a very long and arduous one to come out with a completed product. He was forced to give the ending a happy tone. Romero wanted to remain closer to the source material. He also was pretty upset that the studio recut the movie without his approval or knowledge. So after this, he went back to making independent movies for the most part. But I did mention reappraisal, so let's do that for Monkey Shines right now. This movie starts nice and innocently with athletic law student Alan Mann waking up next to his girlfriend Linda. He gets up and does some naked stretches and yoga. Legitimately he does, because he's kind of a workout freak, so of course he does stretches naked. But then he packs his backpack full of bricks and puts weights on his wrist and ankles and goes for a fairly hard run, all things considered. I mean, he's sweating pretty good. However, when he's running down the sidewalk, there's a dog that appears to lunge at Alan, and he doesn't realize the dog is actually on a leash. So he's kind of forced out into a road where he's hit by a truck. Alan's in surgery with Dr. Wiseman. Now, Wiseman's kind of a jerk, and I like that he's played by Stanley Tucci in this. He's kind of perfect for the jerkish, bad, bedside-mannered doctor. But he's immediately cracking wise about Alan and just seemingly taking things a little too lightly in the operating room. Wiseman is unable to correct the damage that was done to his spine, so Alan is rendered a quadriplegic. He's able to save his life, but not his mobility. Alan's mom, Dorothy, moves in to help her son, but she's not really helping his mental state. She's very doting, she's very overbearing, and pretty quickly things seem to go south for Alan. His girlfriend didn't come very often to visit him. His mom, like I said, is overbearing and just getting on his nerves. His nurse has hardly any decent bedside manner. We'll talk about her in a little bit. And he's treated almost like a pariah by his friends. He even tries to kill himself. And shortly before he killed himself, apparently Linda left Alan. And she ends up shacking up with Dr. Wiseman just to rub salt in the wounds of Wiseman not being able to give Alan's mobility back to him. Now, there is one friend who is still pretty devoted to Alan, and that is a scientist named Jeffrey. He works with capuchin monkeys. Now, get this. He works with these monkeys to try to make them smarter. He makes a serum out of human brains and then injects the monkeys with them. However, Jeffrey's research is pretty much on the line. The dean of the college that he's working at is pushing for results. However, Jeffrey does have a star monkey in his lab, Ella, and Jeffrey decides to set Ella up in Alan's house to act as his helper. She can dial the phone, she can fetch things for him, and so forth. And she's, like I said, basically a superstar. However, his nurse has an immediate hatred for her. But Alan and Ella immediately hit it off. And on top of getting help from Ella, Alan is also assigned basically a service monkey trainer in the form of Melanie Parker. Jeffrey and Melanie connect to have her train Ella originally, and the good news is that Ella is already pretty smart, and a lot of the training is already done for her. However, it's amazingly clear that Ella is incredibly smart. She shows incredible intuition for when Alan should go to bed, even when he really just wants to keep working. Ella also knows how to steal and hide the box of her reward treats so that she always has that available to her. Now, there are a couple of things that seem to become a bit of a concern. First, Ella seems to react to blood from when Melanie accidentally nicks Alan's shaving. Second, she is incredibly protective of Alan. She also raises her hand in class when Alan actually knows the answer being asked by the professor. It's as if she knew that he knew the answer. She also wouldn't put Jeffrey's phone card into the phone. It's like this little punch card that can dial a phone for a quadriplegic. But she won't put the Jeffrey phone card into the phone when she knows that Jeffrey is standing right there in the room with them. She shouldn't be able to do quite all of these things. And also, Ella loses her temper when Jeffrey sticks her with a syringe to keep her on her brain juice and ultimately is trying to hurt him back. One night, Alan and his nurse, Mary Ann, get into a shouting match over how she's performing her duties and how she thinks his relationship with Ella is unnatural. After she puts Alan in bed and leaves the room, her annoying bird gets out of its cage and tries picking at Alan's face. And Ella overhears everything and gets revenge on the bird by killing it and leaving it in the nurse's slipper to find the next morning. Mary Ann quits and Alan's mother moves in. And speaking of Alan, his mood is really starting to get weird. He's losing his temper constantly. He's also having dreams or experiences of what he thinks is seeing the world through Ella's eyes as she's running around outside. Jeffrey, though lying about her being able to get out of the house after he kind of checks things out in the attic, discovers that she is getting out through the attic window. And he feels as though Alan feels as though Ella and he are connected some way through telepathy. Also, Alan sees his hand twitch at one point. He goes to see another doctor, and that doctor, named Dr. Williams, says it's possible Wiseman was overconfident. He did competently repair the damage from the accident. What he might have missed, though, that Williams sees is a congenital issue that may actually be the cause of the paralysis. He's going to look into it more and get back with Alan, but there might be hope that he can, have use of his limbs again. But on the way home, Alan is seething in anger at Dr. Wiseman, and Ella is picking up on that anger. After he finds out that Wiseman is staying with Linda, Ella pays them a visit and kills them by burning the cabin that they're staying at down. And after realizing that he fantasized about killing the couple, specifically one of the fantasies he had was to do so in a fire, he really wants Jeffrey to take Ella away. His mood has been so ugly and angry whenever he's been around Ella. So he decides to spend a weekend with Melanie, and he relaxes and starts to feel better. The couple even has a little sexy time together. However, things go to shit pretty quick after this when he gets home. His mother disapproves of Melanie pretty badly. And honestly, his mother has been really overbearing as of late. There's a really interesting relationship between Dorothy and Alan that I wish could have been explored a little bit more, but that's, whatever. But when Alan suddenly freaks out with anger at his mom, he realizes this is probably due to Ella being someplace in the house, and he begs his mother to leave, but when she refuses, She ultimately decides to take a bath to calm down, and Ella kills her by tossing a hairdryer into the tub and electrocuting her. Eventually, Jeffrey has to tell Alan that Ella was indeed an experiment, and Alan's pretty upset about this. His friend was lying to him about what made Ella special, and he was kind of lying to Alan about looking out for him. But Jeffrey still wants to do the right thing by bringing a syringe full of the stuff that's used to put animals down. However, Ella is a little too fast and too smart for Jeffrey and injects him instead and basically kills Jeffrey. Ella also finds an additional syringe that she's going to use on Melanie when Melanie comes over after calling Alan and having the phone go dead because she hears Ella making all sorts of noise on the other end. As the climax continues, Alan turns his anger toward Ella. He calls her fuckface at one point. That's pretty funny. He also calls her slime. In fact, when Ella tries to take control of the entire situation by peeing on Alan to basically claim her dominance over him, he says this line to her: "You slime, you filth, I'm going to take you apart. I'm going to rip your fucking eyes out." That's harsh. But what's more, he does kill Ella. How does a quadriplegic kill a rampaging monkey? By basically tricking her into, he is able to make his arm move, which is part of the evidence that Dr. Williams was looking for in order to have the second operation to fix that part of his spine. But he is able to move it over to play a cassette in the radio that basically triggers Ella to want to cuddle with him as if they're going to go to bed soon. So when he is able to basically get her near him, he grabs her by the throat with his teeth and starts whipping her body around and basically breaks her neck. It's a crazy ending, but in the end, Alan does get the surgery by Doc Williams, and it does restore his ability to use his arms and legs again, but not before one last shock scare when Williams slices into Alan's back and Ella comes busting out through the incision. Oh, one last thing about this movie that I feel I do need to kind of address, because this comes up in some conversations about this movie. There are a few times in this movie in which Alan is really pissed off and has teeth similar to Ella's. I don't know if that's something that he's actually growing as he and Ella are kind of passing their emotions back and forth, or if it's imaginary or what. It's weird. I don't know what the answer is or why they went that way, other than to maybe really drive home the connection part of, or what. There is a tiny bit of a supernatural element here because there is no real explanation why Alan and Ella can basically feed off of each other's emotions. But so this is kind of goes back to Season of the Witch, where Romero is kind of doing something supernatural, but it's not usually his shtick. Either which way, I kind of feel like I needed to address the teeth thing for a second before moving on. But now let's talk about those three things that I like about Monkey Shines. First up, this movie does have some good insight on what the life and frustration is of a newly paralyzed person. I think about, just think about this. Think about how much we take for granted our ability to walk, and even more so, the use of your hands and arms. You can't drink without having someone move a glass up to your mouth or with a straw or whatever. What happens if you drop something? You ain't picking it up. There's a point in this movie in which Alan is using this little plastic stick or glass stick to turn pages of a book that he's reading, and he drops the stick and you're just sitting there almost desperate to move to pick that thing up like you would if you just dropped your pencil off the desk. It feels incredibly frustrating, and you kind of experience that with Alan. And on top of that, you do get a little bit of an idea what it's like to train a service animal. So we also kind of see how a quadriplegic can have a sex life rather in this movie. So you do kind of get some insight on what that life is like, and it is extremely difficult, I'm sure. Second, there are a lot of very interesting and good characters in this movie. Of course, Alan, Jeffrey, and Melanie are all engaging characters. Alan is our focus character, and to see him go through some pretty serious emotional mood swings is interesting. Melanie is incredibly sweet and likable. Jeffrey is incredibly faceted as a character. He's a guy with a lot of great intentions. He wants Ella to be smart. He wants to give her the intelligence to help his friend Alan. He does make some pretty bad mistakes, but not for a lack of wanting things to work out for the good. However, of all the characters, the character of Nurse Marianne is by far the most interesting and watchable in this movie. This lady is a terrible nurse. She's a jerk. She bitches about her job and she bitches about Alan. She treats him like he's a burden to her. From the very first moment we see her, she sucks. Her immediate and insane hatred at Alan having this monkey helper is just over the top. She flips out at Alan for the death of her bird. She goes so far as to calling Ella his little demon and blames him for making her kill the bird. She just yells at the top of her lungs about him somehow killing the bird. Marianne is played by George Romero's wife at the time, Christine Forrest. Part of the reason why George Romero was sought out for this directing job was that sense of humor that I brought up. While John Pankow's Jeffrey has some pretty good lines and pretty dark sense of humor in this, including one great put down toward Alan's girlfriend Linda by calling her a clinical cunt. All that dark sense of humor seems to be poured into his wife's character, and it's fantastic. Thirdly, I mean, come on, it's Ella. Ella is played by a monkey named Boo, and Boo is just a terrific little actress. I mean, I don't even know what else to say about Boo, the capuchin monkey. I mean, it's a monkey. Sure, she's acting like a crazy wild animal with anger issues through a chunk of the movie, but damn it, if there's also not a good portion of the movie where she's also super cute and exactly what you want to see when it comes to a monkey. And if you like little monkeys, Boo is worthy to watch for the entire runtime of this movie. That wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon at filmseizure.com. You can also listen to episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday morning, also at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieenema.com, to read new articles and reviews every Friday morning. Next week, we return to the world of Kolchak the Night Stalker for an eerie episode dealing with an invisible being from another world in the third episode of that series, called They Have Been, They Are, They Will Be. Until next week, stay spooky.